John Savill started with molecular diagnostics, talked about epigenetics, and the need, quite frankly, to see investors come in to back the transformational capabilities that we have today. Who from the investors' world, against the background of improving price-earnings ratios in only a matter of months, who's feeling more light-footed, feels that there is a way through, and who's prepared to go on the 15-year dream? Are you so limited by 10-year timescales with an average of 3 to 6 years in rotation that it's just too difficult to get into? Who's here feeling positive in the investment world, and who's come to observe because they really feel that we're not offering opportunities?
Just joined Roxbury Ventures from the operating side, from a small biotech company. We just launched in the UK a UK-wide early stage venture fund. So coming from the positive side, that this is a US fund that has not launched a UK early stage life sciences fund to try and fill that gap, we're feeling quite positive about that. But I will say it has been a challenge, and we had to do a lot of work to overcome the hurdles of the last 15, 20 years of investors in venture funds having a poor return in venture funds. And because of that, people had to, talking about trust and risk, had to agree that there was really an opportunity, and now is the right time to really grasp that opportunity in early stage investing in life sciences, and that you can make a return from that. So we had to convince our investors of that. So we're feeling positive as a new UK fund launching here, and looking forward to investing in companies in the UK.
Thank you for that. Can I ask you, are you finding it easy to find your way around, or is this complex land of ours pretty obscure?
I've only been on board 10 days, so but I know I've been in the UK for a long time, so we're being inundated obviously with interest from universities and early stage companies, which we're delighted with, and we're now building relationships with the tech transfer offices within many universities, since we are at the seed early stage. I will say some universities are much easier than others. And I think there are changes to be made, especially within some universities, and we hope to help guide that and work with the small companies within those that I think need a little bit more nurturing than we would have seen in the US. So
great to welcome a US fund. Have you set up funds in Singapore and in Shanghai, or are we unique in your wisdom?
So we have a US-focused fund, small fund, but this new, it's a European fund, but 90% of the money will be UK-focused.
Thank you very much. Well done. Now, while we're on the investment theme and responding to John, another investor who's a bit more cynical, been here a few years, fingers burnt, worried about what to do next, or any other investor.
Bill. Thank you. Andrew Elder from Albion Ventures. I'm not completely cynical. I think I'm a bit mixed, but I just wanted to pick up on the issue of timing, and actually what industry I think maybe needs to reflect on a little bit more. I completely concur with Martin's point on timing being absolutely critical in healthcare. Has an innate long-term cycle, whether it's development of new technologies or adoption of technologies or new delivery systems. It's just it's there. In the past, there have been lots of step-off points for investors in order to get returns from investments, and they've typically been from private markets into public markets, so the IPO market, before then chipping on to industry. And also industry has been adopting technologies sooner in that cycle, giving quicker returns and therefore better returns, keeping a virtuous cycle of investment and new money coming into investment going. One of the issues then has been sort of the removal of the IPO market at the same time as industry adopts technologies later in their development, so requiring commercial uptake and therefore de-risking themselves at the same time as one of those jump-off points has basically disappeared. Creates a sort of chasm, if you like. And so you're then relying on very long-term money to get technologies through this long-term innate cycle. The issue there is that Martin's pointed out there aren't many pots of very long-term money, because people are used to this 10 to 12 year cycle. So we have some structural issues, which one thing which can improve that is the IPO market coming back, And the other thing, I think, is being more flexible about the term of money. That's quite hard to change investors, but clearly Syncona is doing set up, I think, perfectly to do that or to start that. But the one thing I think we haven't necessarily talked about is industry's role in actually going back and saying, well, we can't just have our cake and eat it. Adopt late-stage technologies where there's not a funding mechanism to get those late-stage technologies through. And so reaching out earlier into that development progress, helping that development and adopting things sooner, I think is a big role that industry can start to pick up on.
So Patrick or John, do you feel that would it help you that venture takes the first 6 to 7 years of the time scale, and then it hits your P&L and you take another 7 years? Is that a better equation?
Well, I have to say, I think the problem was well characterized. I think there is a chasm forming here, and you see that on the big business side as well as the venture side. We've actually created a fund where we're trying to sort of help with that chasm, particularly on the scaling. Now, it's too early to say whether or not that's going to be a success or not, but I will say we see the problem, and two, we're trying to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more long-sighted, not with big pots of money, but with precise investments that help what we think are particularly assets or technologies that are really disruptive through that midterm period. So,
thank you for that. Patrick?
I think that the biggest valuation increase, most value can be created when you go from animals to man. And so we are really focusing on and working very closely with the entrepreneurial communities and the VCs to create companies there and support them with long-term capital. We have, together with GSK, teamed up, for example, with Index Ventures for a 200 million fund. And it's not just the money we bring to the market here, but more importantly, the collaboration between people like Monsev and Paul Peter Tak and Paul Stoffels, together with the Index entrepreneurs, is the dialogue. How do you best place your investments? How do you best develop a product? Meaning people like Monsev and Paul Peter have a real long-term view. They have gone through it many times. So we think that those joint investments and that advice we can deliver to entrepreneurs will get to better outcomes and will provide a better return for the LPs.
it's interesting. That's precisely what we're doing with our fund as well. It's the same type of
Great structure. John Savill, then Martin.
So I had a lot of sympathy with points made, and I think they point to two things, push and pull. I think over the last 5 years, we've seen universities much better equipped to push prospects because universities and tech transfer organisations are now much more able to identify investable propositions that really have scope. And similarly, we've seen strategic R&D collaborations between industry and academe that represents pull. And we're at GSK, at my university, Edinburgh, we have a GSK DPAC award, some fundamental work on acute pancreatitis. Bright young man has access to all the resources that GSK can offer him to translate this to be a really investable proposition. So I think some of the role that industry can do to bring things closer to application is through these strategic R&D partnerships, and certainly the big research-intensive universities in the UK are now very keen on that, whereas we heard earlier, 15 years ago, didn't want to do that.
Can I just, thanks very much for that, John. John, you talked about synthetic biology and these entirely novel nucleic acids. Now, LMB's got a great track record. They did do humanized monoclonals. Does anyone out there get excited? Has anyone looked at these entirely novel nucleic acids? And in particular, have any of the venture capitalists had a look to see what the hell's going on?
I actually met with Jason Chin about 3 years ago, and I couldn't figure it out at that time. So I'd quite like to talk to you about it.
So that's one new lead. That's great. Anyone else out there come across these novel nucleic acids? No? Well, they've got a great track.
You've got one in the back.
Thank you.
Niall O'Donnell, Rivervest Venture Partners. I'll make it the prize for the longest travel. I came from San Diego for this conference, so thank you very much for hosting. I've actually got sort of two perspectives on this. We at Rivervest actually out-licensed from ISIS Pharmaceuticals, the original antisense company, as it were, the old second generation antisense. And it actually worked very, very well for us. We actually sold the company to Pfizer. But that was an uphill struggle that took a long time. It was a little bit of an evangelical sale. And that's a technology that's been around for almost 15 to 20 years. So on the novel side of things, I think the first question that I would get if I invested in that from my partners are, what's the FDA going to say about novel things in the body? What's the hurdle rate there for getting that through the regulators? And once you've done that, what's the hurdle for getting that on the radar for pharmaceutical acquirer? If I can't answer those two questions, we're not going to make the investment.
I'm going to immediately respond by saying I used to mess around with viruses as a vector system, and I was very worried they'd ever get through. I also used to put, can we hit that light? It's blinding, I can't see the audience. Maybe you want me to be blinded on the audience, but that light, we've got spotlights here. If we can hit that one in the middle there, it'd be great. So I mean, we do put things, strange things in the body. Interferon used to come out of a Hodgkin lymphoma cancer cell, and we got allowed to put that into the body. But so John Savill, what's the regulator going to say about these novel nucleic acids?
This is hot discovery science, but it's a step change. And as Martin says, some of this has been road tested around viral gene therapy, and it just illustrates a hot opportunity that may or may not transform therapy.
So those of you who like punting like I do, because I like going on the horses, if you want to join me on nucleic acids, come and see Bill.
So Milstein and Köhler, 1973, published monoclonal antibodies. 1975, people are talking about that as therapy. Therapies come along in the 90s.
Yeah.
I reckon we're there with these synthetic biology products. Could they be vaccines? Could they be antisense? We'll see.
Thank you for that.
Bill, just want to respond to one of the questions about sort of the investor point. You know, I think we have to be really honest about the data that we have, and not pretend as investors that it sort of all worked out. But if only, you know, the pharma business would pay us fair values. You know, it's John's fault here for not giving us fair value. You know, we've run an experiment, and the data is now available and unambiguous. Data across hundreds of billions of dollars, across hundreds of funds, across all geographies, where the average fund lost money. And if you gave the money back, you got in the top quartile. That's the data. And the really scary thing about the data is that the people right at the top of the queue made 2 to 2.5 times their money. They didn't make 20 or 30 times their money. So there's no sort of thin tail here that's compensating for the loss across the range. Yeah, that's the data. So you've got to rationalize that somehow. And I think one way to rationalize it is in the things that we have invested in as investors. And the bulk of that capital has gone to take an asset, a technology asset, and to take it midway in the development process, and the thesis has always been that you will sell it to somebody else. I think that's a difficult model, and I think we as investors have to go back and question whether investors we face a competitive world for capital, where, you know, the guys in the LPs that we all talk to have a choice between giving it to, in their alternative strategy, giving it to the tech guys or giving it to life science or putting it in property or whatever. Actually, can we compete with that model? And I think it's difficult. And I think we have to go back and reinvent the things that we invest in as well.
Thank you very much for that. I want to move back to John Dineen now. I mean, John quite shocked me with, I didn't know where he was coming from with his Swiss Army knives, and then I picked up the theme. The complexity of PET I never viewed as a Swiss Army knife, but I agree with you that, you know, in the new world of the next generation of healthcare, as we do personalize it, as we do stratify it, as we do integrate it, that's a great opportunity. So I suppose my question is to Big Pharma, and there are a number of you in the room, Do you feel there's a good opportunity to look at innovation by combining with diagnostics? And really, I mean, the only people, I mean, I remember going to Roche, about 8 years ago, and Big Pharma and Roche didn't think anything of their diagnostic division. It's only latterly that they've started to see it as being key to the efficacy of their anti-cancer proteins. And now they see it as vital. But does Big Pharma see working, not necessarily buying diagnostics, but working with diagnostics as an essential way for the future? We've got J&J here, but I'm going to ask, is GSK. I know we've got... Alan, where are you? You're out there?
Not GSK anymore.
Well, come on, you. You told me that all this share price increase was because of your wisdom, so I'll come back to you.
GSK was very slow in getting into diagnostics. In fact, the first guy I hired about 10 years ago, some of you'll know Ian Gillan, had to go on and work in, I don't remember, product development or something, because we at that time we couldn't quite get the traction. But I think things have changed, and I think it's to the point that some of the panels are making. I mean, Martin talked about how difficult it's been for VCs to get return on investment. It's been equally difficult for pharma companies to get that return on investment. And I've been in the discovery business for about 25 years, and so I'm well qualified to talk about that. And although I have had successes, I've had many more failures than successes. And so there has been a shift, and that shift has started to embrace diagnostics. And the shift is to actually be taking drugs which were never meant to address the ailments of 100% of a population, to actually try and identify the population that these drugs are best used to treat. And I think that's where this whole new area of tailored medicines and much more precise diagnostic, both molecular diagnostics and diagnostic technologies, is actually going to be investable, because in fact the results that people like Martin are looking for are much more readily available if you get the right drug into the right patient population. If you can identify that patient population, if you can get those into the sort of efficient clinical trials that are now being developed in various parts of the UK and elsewhere, then I think there's a big use for a big enthusiasm, growing enthusiasm for diagnostic capability in general.
So let me ask Big Pharma. It seems to me that we do have a change, that this passion to find the blockbuster and only invest in blockbusters is disappearing. And on the other side, the passion to do me tooism. So if I can get a better H2 antagonist or some other form, I'll go for it, so I use my market strength. I certainly, when I hear GSK speak, they say, no, we're after innovation today. Is that the same in J&J?
Absolutely. We are very focused on generating differentiated products for patients, which are going to be differentiated not today, but in 10, 15 years when you're on the market, and which impact on patients and on society for all. So we are not going to focus on incremental changes. It's absolutely about what is the best product. For example, in prostate cancer, it can be prevented instead of treated. So it's absolutely big differentiated products.
Bill, we're still not to the point where the pharma companies would come to a global leader in diagnostics and say, find me this population. I need to find this population of what I think will be the responders. So we've got a ways to go. You've got sort of a dance going on, and we say, what's the problem? And say, what are you looking for? But when we get to the point where I think there's a very active dialogue around, can you find me this population? And we go off and work on that. And you really do. You take an MRI or a CT, even an ultrasound. They've been designed for clinicians as Swiss Army knives to solve all sorts of problems. Our ability to tailor an MRI to find a specific phenotype or a specific side effect, or to turn it into a head-only, write unique protocols that sort of zero in like a scalpel, not a Swiss Army knife, is very high. But we've never really been asked to do that. You know, people don't come to us and say, find me this side effect or find me this population of patients. And when that becomes mainstream, I think we'll be having great discussions, and I think they'll be answered. I also would say, for the research community, our dialogues are typically around specific research or basic research. I think there's an opportunity for the research community to look at themselves as integrators as well. And and we saw a little bit of that. You experimented with that with the teams from Oxford, and that really opened up my eyes to how I could use the research community different, use them as an integrator. And I think there's a big opportunity there as well, rather than specific point research or discovery research.
We've got 10 minutes left. I'm keen to get questions from the floor. I've got one on the right, and then one at the back, and then one at the front here. Next three.
Bernie Hamilton here. I've got a question for the board, for the team.
Who are you with? Can you tell?
Sterling IP. So Martin spoke about the model of developing an asset and then selling it on. And traditionally, there's been sort of a focus on market share, how many people would be treated, that kind of thing. We've also talked this morning about innovation and technology. But what part do we think there is in innovation in the way that we take things to the market? So how can we meet the needs of kind of orphan indications and sort of miniaturize the development process to make it efficient and allow these needs to be met?
Great question, and we are looking at alternative licensing as a way to do that. John, do you want to respond, or John Savill, do you want to?
Well, I think it's a very practical problem for discovery funders. For example, the MRC has a fantastic prion unit. There are patients with prion disease. There aren't many of them. How do you translate the discoveries into patient care? And certainly, as Bill says, there's a claim in the UK that there are 6 million people who have a rare disease of one form or another. And obviously the development models, the business models look different with rare diseases. So I think there could be an opportunity, as you infer, for some innovation in this process of commercialisation.
I do think if adaptive licensing was put into effect in the UK, it would revolutionise the commercial attraction of investing in the UK.
Right, so a new organisation's been formed called CASME, that's UCL and Oxford combining to look at how we improve the regulatory background. We've met with their chief executive. He said, if I make a difference in 5 years, I said, no, I'm too old, actually 18 months, it wasn't 10 seconds, but I said, you know, if you don't make a difference in 18 months, then, you know, we're not here for bureaucracy, we're here for action. So we are trying to, there's a pretty strong advisory board which is trying to call them account to get off their bums and make a change. I think we're going to be pushing at an open door. I mean, if you look at the team that's represented here, we're all in agreement we want to do it. We know we are negatively impacting on our ability to improve patient care and meet unmet clinical need, and it's our job to change that. So thank you very much. There's an excellent question. One at the back, please, right at the back.
Hi, it's Jan Thurkedal from GSK. I'm responsible for the technology platform which is supporting our small but important exploration in gene therapy, which was alluded to earlier, an autologous cell-based gene therapy. The point I wanted to make was to tease out our earlier discussion about segmentation and diagnostics, because this doesn't just apply to the clinical phase. We need to understand how this is implemented commercially so that we can identify our patients. And in the case that I'm most interested in, we need to target these patients before they're symptomatic. So there's a technology part to that, which is arguably straightforward, but there's a systems part here. And this is really where I think the question and challenge is to how we work with the NHS. How do we implement these diagnostics into extending our panel? We're seeing, I think, a more flexible system in the States, albeit state by state. But in the UK, for us, this is one of the big challenges. How do we get these additional tests added to the panels, particularly for very rare diseases, so that we've then actually got a route to use the therapy once we've developed it? So the question, I guess, is around the integration with the NHS, and how do we, particularly as a pharma company, get those tests implemented to a panel,
bearing in mind the challenges that Big Pharma has around petitioning for those sorts of things, which could be seen as market influence.
I regret Ian's not with us. I don't know whether anyone else who's here from the NHS feels they can have a shot at that. I actually got dinner with Malcolm Grant tonight. I see Sally Davis regularly. All I can offer, sir, is if you give me the preciseness of what you're seeking to achieve, then I can work to transfer and come back to you with, I mean, it may be through CASMIC. We know we've all got to do this. I mean, I'm fascinated to know how we're going to license algorithms. I can't wait to get into patient data and license algorithms. But we need to be able to, have the GLP in the production of the algorithm, and we need to make sure that every day we add data to the algorithm linking genotype to phenotype, we don't have to go back for a new license. So we've got to have in-process licensing in order to use the algorithms, which will start to give us the stratified base you're talking about. So I'm absolutely with you, but it would help me if you could give me the precise example, because I'm a generalist, you're the specialist. I can therefore be your advocate. Thank you for the question. Can I move down to the front?
I'm from the NHS, maybe if...
Oh, please, excellent. They haven't turned off that bloody light, so I'm completely blinded. Even though I haven't got a viral vector that will knock it out.
My name's Simon Wood. I'm working with the Eastern Academic Health Science Network. Just very quick bit of context. The NHS facing massive challenges at the moment, ageing population, restricted financial resources, very hospital-centric system, and absolutely at one with kind of what you're talking about today, the need to get much more sort of upstream prevention, patient prediction, stratification tools. But what have we just done in a sense, in terms of procurement? We have fragmented it. We've got 150-ish or so clinical commissioning groups, typically populations of 200, 250,000 or so, not really going to help, I would suspect, with the sort of agenda we're looking at today. But what we have also created at the same time are these academic health science networks. 15 of them, our population, 4.5 million, typically a 10 billion population. And what we are really looking to do is to find out how we can much better work with industry to not just create health, but to create wealth. We're not very good, I suspect, at doing that. We need some help from you to really engage with us as to how we're going to do that. And I think help probably to suggest to us that maybe what you'd really like us to be doing is, just as you were talking about the links between UCL and Oxford, actually thinking, is 4-5 million population sufficient? Do we need to be thinking maybe 10 million? What are some of the metrics that are going to work, and the partnerships and the collaboration? And we certainly will be looking to collaborate with our partners. So I think there is a vehicle there that potentially can help fill this vacuum, but we need some real help with how you want to engage with us and what the challenges are that you think we should be following. The danger, I think, is that we continue to go down a rather kind of health view of the world rather than properly including industry in that.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, you might like to respond to the proposal that we'd be delighted to host through the Stevenage Biocluster, a meeting that you would put together and invite interested parties to come to discuss the mechanisms, etc. So, nothing would be more delightful to hear that the Eastern England Academic Health grouping has come together here and opened it up to academia and entrepreneurs to discuss how they feel you can help them. So I think it's visibility and personal contact is key, and we don't want to keep on going up to poor old Ian or his successor to make that. We need to get laterals going in the system, and the system needs to feel comfortable to delegate that accountability to people like yourself.
Yeah, we'd be delighted to do that.
So I'm going to get Martino to follow up with you, and Martino, that's the challenge. It'd be great. So thank you for that. There was a question down at the front here. We've got time for 3 more questions before I release you for bladder and other activities. Coffee.
Hello, Kevin Cox, Chief Executive of Imanova, which is an imaging company, a joint venture between 3 of the London colleges and the MRC. First of all, an observation, we tended to move towards a discussion about the pharma model, not actually the convergent technology model. And I can't imagine anything more convergent than molecular imaging when you think of the disciplines required to come together to be successful in that area. And I thought it was very interesting that 3 of the panel actually talked about it as being one of their areas of interest in the future. An observation really is that actually as a technology it's not used that widely, as widely it should be by pharmaceutical industry to help to overcome some of those issues of drug development and the timing of drug development. And so all I'm asking really is can we in some way encourage the increasing use of this type of technology and other technologies to try to shorten that lead time of getting drugs through to being commercialized? And by the way, we're very open for business.
Well, your point is well made, and if we can start to change the regulatory authorities, that we can demonstrate physiological change, anatomical change in the body, and they will take that into account rather than seeing whether the cohort's alive or dead at the end of it.
Exactly.
It will be great. And frankly, we've got so much longevity nowadays that it's difficult to think how long you have to look at the blinded cohort to understand what your success is. So I think,
Yeah, if I can just comment, I think right with you, obviously, and thinking about John Dineen's example of Alzheimer's, I reckon we're not going to crack it at all unless we have non-invasive molecular imaging to define the populations, because it takes so long to show that there's a difference unless you do that.
it's getting, we'll take the last 2 and then we really have to close. Please, sir.
Duncan Judd, my company is Verheyen. I was formerly with GSK. Sitting here, I hear quite a lot of what I would call siloed views. What we need, I think, is to parody Tony Blair, communication. We've heard about having conferences, but what I'll be interested to hear from the panel, because now we're in an age of modern technology, communication has changed with internet, smartphones, etc. Other industries have adopted things like crowdsourcing to gauge and communicate, and I was wondering whether the panel could share with us any insight into whether that's been successful or whether they've actually used methodology like that to gain greater insight.
Panel?
I'd say we've experimented with it. I wouldn't sit here and tell you we've had breakthrough results with those technologies yet, but we do explore those. We've got a couple of programs, one around breast cancer, where we found and selected some programs that we wanted to fund from a research standpoint. We're also doing the same thing in the US with traumatic brain injury, a program co-funded with the National Football League, where we've put together a fund and crowdsourced ideas that that will be relevant to the diagnosis of traumatic brain injury and are funding those. So we're using some of those technologies to engage the broader network, but that's activity, not results, that I speak of at this point.
Martin?
I think the other area is, where we're going to get large data sets of potentially genomic information, ideally clinical informatic information. There's now very clear evidence that when you put large data sets out to the global data analytic community, you get better solutions than you do with pure in-house solutions. The real problem with that, of course, is patient anonymity. And I don't know how that will need to be addressed for those kind of solutions to work.
John, then Patrick. John?
Maybe not quite crowdsourcing, but I think the disease-specific charities in the UK are enormously helpful in articulating research with a group of people who are highly motivated, both affected by the disease and also carers. So you can get very large groupings of people interested in research projects. Cystic Fibrosis Trust is a really good example of that.
Patrick?
Yeah, we have helped to establish, together with the Marine County Foundation in California, a disease network around MS, provided them the IT tools really to bring together very different data sets going from data people put in on the web through Google, clinical data, pharmacological data, genetic data. Really the goal is to identify the subtypes and better understand MS. So those non-profit organizations, I think, could be quite a tool to bring all the data together and to be a base for new research.
I'm going to ask, Bernard Taylor's here, who chairs ISIS. I'm going to ask Bernard about academia, and I suppose my question for Bernard is, Bernard, taking on from Patrick, I was with an eminent US scientist last night who's in deep shock because the NIH has now switched to a translation agenda, and having for the last 35 years got his full grant, he got half his grant. So being a man who doesn't like to see his numbers go down, he's immediately arrived in the United Kingdom to get at more financing. So I'm raising this because we won't spend long on it, but it is interesting that even the great United States that really monopolized Big Pharma through New Jersey as the production base, and I have worked in New Jersey, that's why I speak like that. The question is, Bernard, there's a real focus. I'd like to emphasize the focus on translation is to make sure we make good a lost opportunity. I have no sense in my mind that we're trying to reduce the basic research without which all would be lost. And what's happening in the States looks a little bit tricky to me because, not only have they said translation, but they've actually started to say they've apportioned it geographically. So it's no longer the centers of excellence, one bit goes to one state, one bit goes to another, and that's a bloody disaster. So do you feel that are the academics up in uprage as we focus on translation, or are we going to have true partnerships where they understand that there is actually a welcoming of basic research, but we do need to see translation brought to the fore?
This is totally unscripted, so I'll try and answer that question for you, Bill. First of all, a bit of context from me. I've been chairman of ISIS Innovation, which is the Oxford University intellectual property development company, for about 13 years, and involved with ISIS since it started 22 years ago. When ISIS started, the thought of trade, as it was known, getting involved with the great academics of Oxford University, was abhorrent to them, and they shied away from it. 22 years on, they welcome it. And I think the concepts of interdisciplinarity, which one of the speakers mentioned, and the need to get involved with partners to develop the technologies that are coming out of the scientific research are well recognized. I think what 22 years of trying to do translation have taught us is that it is about translation, it's about impact, and not about trying to make some financial gain off the bat. And that to do that, you've got to make it easy, and you need a partner. It takes a long time to develop a medical product, obviously a bit shorter for a device, but longer for a drug. And you can't do that as a small company on your own, you need partners, and that thought is going backwards towards the academics who now, I think, welcome the idea of doing research in partnership with large corporates. And indeed, GE at Oxford does have partnerships, as does J&J, I think. So it's really important that that continues. So I think there is a recognition, Bill, to answer your question. I think things have changed. I think there's still a shortage of venture capital money. That's definitely the case, and you can address the venture capitalists about that later. And I think there is still a feeling that people want results sooner than they're probably available. And so patience is really important.
Thanks very much, Bernard. That's great. I'm just going to come back to Patrick Verheyen, who focused on 2A and 2B. Now, I suppose my question for John and for Patrick is, you can get great volume in clinical patients in India and they're very responsive, but do you choose to do 2A and 2B in the UK, or do you choose to do it in the USA or India or China? Do you have any geographical choice as to where you do 2A and 2B, which after all are actually critical, it's your critical first identification of efficacy?
We do them worldwide, but a big portion of, I would say, 25% in Europe. We do a significant part in Russia. The clinical studies we do in India and China are limited because of some quality issues at times.
I have exactly the same reaction if you look at our footprint and where we're doing things.
So do we have anyone from clinical research here? Because I continue to hear frustrations that we can't get through the efficacy panels quickly enough and we can't get the trials done. And it just seems to me one of the greatest wasted opportunities, because we have the skills, we have the diagnostic capability, we should be able to be the largest country in the world in 2A, 2B. So that's my challenge. Anyone out there in the clinical world who wants to accept?
Well, come to Scotland, where
I'm treating the UK.
Where I still work, where we've got R&D management approvals down to 20 days median, and ethical approval is the UK standard of 30 days. And if we can do it in Scotland, it can be done in the major centres in England, and the figures are improving progressively.
Good. Thanks for that, John. So for any of you out there deciding where to go, you can start in Scotland and then we'll persuade you to come south.
Bill's question.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Oksana Holler, Senior Manager of Essex and Hertfordshire Comprehensive Local Research Network. Apologies for a long name. I'm part of the National Institute for Health Research, and I just would like to say that it's not just Scotland is open for business, but the rest of England as well. Just for Essex and Hertfordshire, for example, the NHS R&D approval times now reduced from 180 days to 12, and 72% of clinical trials from industry now recruiting to time and target. So it's about time we bring business in the district hospitals too.
Excellent. Thank you for that critical communication.
Thank you. Bill Dawson. I'm chairman of the South East Health Technology Alliance, which are the 1,200 med tech companies from Kent, around London and up to Oxford. And the question is to all the panel, really. The interface between an academic having an interesting diagnostic, a patient population which he has no access to through a small company because they have no access, and has no funding to take it forward. Interested whether the panel see any vehicles that might facilitate that interaction between 4 or 5 disparate groups, all with their own interests. And just to pick up on the Eastern Academic Health Science Network, we're working with the Kent, Surrey and Sussex Academic Health Science Network to try to provide a vehicle like that, because there needs to be an interface that will bring fundamental science at the diagnostic level through the patient population to the industrial community. Is anything other than the AHSN in your vision for such an issue?
John?
So it works. We've done it in Scotland. We've got a single point of contact. And that's the first thing an AHSN needs if it's to engage, particularly with small companies, is you need a single point of contact. We've done that in Scotland. It's an AHSN. It's been there for 5 years. We have a web presence so that the projects and experts can be seen. And we've now in the UK, in the public sector, we've got Gateway to Research, funded by the UK government in the last spending review, now delivering a real-time access to research projects with the contact details. So this stuff is being done and it's being piloted, but I'm particularly cognizant of that point you make. Small companies with very little resources find it difficult to penetrate all this, but steps are being taken to pursue that. And we've thought in the MRC about whether some of our devolved portfolio of funding to universities for early tech transfer should also be earmarked for SME engagement specifically. And Bill hinted earlier at the successful NIH Small Business Innovation Programme in the USA. We'd love to do that in Britain, but that's going to have to be the NHS because of the way the funding pools work. So AHSNs may be a vehicle for that too, in time.
Very good. Well, can I thank you, the audience, for your active participation? Can I thank our panelists for their time today? I don't